It's Wednesday, August 26th, 2026. You're listening to the DX Today AI Daily Brief. Today, Apple opens its fall hardware season with two desktops built for local AI work. A driverless freight company lands its largest round yet, and Australia softens the energy rules it had drafted for AI data centers. Let's get into it.
Apple made its first product announcements of the season, and both are aimed squarely at people who run AI models on their own machines. The new Mac Mini introduces Apple's all-new M6 chip with an M5 Pro configuration above it. Alongside it, Apple introduced a new Mac Studio built around M5 Max and M5 Ultra Silicon. The company's pitch leans on unified memory and neural accelerator throughput, the two specifications that decide how large a model a developer can hold in memory locally rather than renting time in someone else's data center. Apple says retail availability begins September 22nd. It is a quiet but pointed argument that serious AI development does not have to live in the cloud.
From the desktop to the highway.
Gartic has raised $200 million in a Series D, the largest round in the company's history. The Qatar Investment Authority and Koch Disruptive Technologies led the financing. Gartic does not build robo-taxis. It runs what the industry calls the middle mile, the short, repeatable freight hops between distribution centers and retail stores, and it has been operating driverless on those routes for customers, including PepsiCo. That narrow focus is the whole strategy. Fixed routes are easier to validate than open city driving, and they generate revenue while the harder problems stay unsolved. The new capital is earmarked for expanding driverless commercial freight operations as demand for autonomous logistics accelerates. It is one of the few autonomy stories now measured in delivered loads rather than demonstration miles.
Meanwhile, in the legal profession,
Google Cloud has launched Gemini Enterprise for Legal, a version of its agentic AI platform purpose-built for law firms and corporate legal departments. The product ships in preview with agents tuned for the specific shape of legal work, document review, contract analysis, and matter research, rather than a general assistant pointed at legal text. The move puts Google directly into a market where specialist vendors have spent years building trust and where the tolerance for a confident wrong answer is close to zero. Courts across the United States have spent the past year sanctioning lawyers for filings built on fabricated citations, which makes verifiability, not fluency, the feature that matters. Google is betting that enterprise-grade grounding is the thing big law will actually pay for.
Next, the power problem.
Emerald AI closed a $150 million Series A that the company says was oversubscribed at a valuation of $1.05 billion. The startup addresses the constraint that now governs the entire AI build-out, which is not chips, but electricity. Emerald's software lets a data center modulate its own power draw in response to grid conditions, turning a facility that utilities treat as a liability into what the company calls a flexible grid asset. If a campus can shed load during peak demand, it can often be connected years sooner than one that cannot. That is the pitch. And the funding suggests investors think interconnection queues, not silicon, will decide who builds capacity first.
Staying with infrastructure.
Cisco has expanded its secure AI factory with NVIDIA, bringing in Supermicro to supply liquid-cooled and air-cooled rack-scale compute systems. The partnership fills the gap between a reference design and something an enterprise can actually buy and rack. Cisco supplies the networking and security layer, NVIDIA the accelerators, and Supermicro the dense chassis and thermal engineering that rack-scale deployment now requires. The market read the announcement as a meaningful volume commitment. Supermicro shares climbed more than 9% by the close. The broader signal is that AI factories are moving out of the reference architecture phase and into ordinary enterprise procurement, where the buyer is a data center operations team rather than a research lab.
Now to Tel Aviv.
Alice, an Israeli company working on AI trust, safety, and security, has raised $140 million in a round led by Apax Digital Funds. The company says the financing brings its total capital raised to $280 million. Alice sits in a category that barely existed 2 years ago, tooling that inspects what AI systems are doing inside an organization and enforces policy on them. As enterprises move from pilots to agents that can take actions, the security question shifts from whether a model leaks data to what an autonomous system is authorized to do on its own. Investors are increasingly treating that control layer as a separate product category rather than a feature of the model provider.
A change at Anthropic.
Anthropic has connected the memory between its chat product and Co-work, its agentic workspace. What a user tells Claude in an ordinary conversation now carries into a Co-work session, and context built during agent work flows back the other way. The company notes the change applies to Co-work sessions running in the cloud rather than local ones. The practical effect is that the assistant stops forgetting across product boundaries, which has been one of the more persistent frustrations for people using these tools for sustained projects. It is a modest-looking update with a larger implication. Persistent shared context is what separates a chatbot from something that behaves like a colleague who remembers last week's decision.
Turning to India.
AM Intelligence has placed a binding order for roughly 9,000 of NVIDIA's Vera Rubin units, destined for an AI factory the company is building in Hyderabad. Reporting on the exact unit of measure has been inconsistent, with some accounts describing 9,000 rack-scale systems and others 9,000 accelerators deployed inside NVL72 configurations, a distinction worth several $billion. What is not in dispute is the direction. India's data center capacity has roughly quadrupled on the back of AI demand, and sovereign compute has become an explicit policy goal rather than a commercial afterthought. Vera Rubin is NVIDIA's next-generation platform, which makes this an order placed largely on the strength of a roadmap.
Now an unlikely alliance.
Stability AI has raised $76 million in a Series B, and the investor list is the story. Sony Music Group and Warner Music Group both took part, alongside Universal Music Group, Electronic Arts, and AMD Ventures. 3 years ago, the major labels were suing generative AI companies over training data. Now 3 of them are on the cap table of 1. The shift reflects a calculation that licensed, rights-cleared generation is coming either way, and that a seat at the table beats a courtroom. For Stability, which has cycled through leadership turmoil and a near-death funding crunch, backing from the rights holders it once alarmed is the most credible endorsement it could have secured.
Next, a deal in Riyadh.
Microsoft and Humane have announced a long-term strategic collaboration to accelerate AI adoption across Saudi Arabia and beyond. Under the agreement, Humane's Alam family of Arabic language models will be made available through Microsoft Foundry and integrated into Microsoft 365 Copilot. Humane is the artificial intelligence company backed by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, created to give the kingdom domestic capability rather than imported software. The arrangement is characteristic of how sovereign AI deals are now being structured. The state supplies capital, energy, and a national language model. The hyperscaler supplies distribution, and the enterprise install base. Both sides get something they could not build alone, and the model itself becomes a form of soft power.
From Seoul, a milestone.
BURTN Technologies has closed a Series C of roughly 100 billion won, about $72 million, in a round that values the company near $870 million and confirms its standing as South Korea's first AI unicorn by local reckoning. WRTN built a consumer AI assistant that found unusual traction among younger Korean users, a demographic that global products have struggled to hold. The company says the capital funds international expansion. That ambition is the interesting part. Korea has produced consumer internet champions that never traveled well beyond the peninsula, and WRTN is now attempting the crossing in a category where the incumbents are the largest technology companies on Earth.
And finally, a policy retreat.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has backed away from a proposal that would have required states to power new AI data centers entirely with sustainable energy. The government is now pursuing a more flexible national standard, with possible carve-outs for Queensland and the Northern Territory. The retreat is narrower than the headlines suggest. Proposed rules still require new facilities to bring in or underwrite additional generation to avoid pushing up consumer power prices and to meet obligations on water use and grid impact. What changed is the absolutism. Australia is the latest government to discover that a clean energy mandate, strict enough to satisfy climate commitments, may also be strict enough to send the data centers somewhere else.
That's your briefing for Wednesday, August 26, 2026. For DX Today, stay curious.